Hi, welcome to the Pursuit of Truth. So there's two Sky News things that I've put on the end of this. The first one is about Sudan, which I've had on before from Sky News, of what they call the Forgotten War. I guess it's probably because of the 7th of October and the Gaza crisis has taken up a lot of the TV, and maybe there's more footage of that, I don't know. But the Sudan thing comes on every so often. But just another example of, why war isn't... we all know war isn't great, but just... I don't know what to say anymore, is it? But just hearing this... She's a journalist, and I'd already seen when her uncle fled, and she was live on Sky News reporting in Sudan, and then he came up and hugged her and brought, I guess, to people watching it that it could be anyone that can be involved in these things, that we're just lucky where we're born, that we don't get to see this kind of wars. We just watch them on TV like it's some kind of, not entertainment, but you know what I mean. We don't experience it in the same way as those who are actually there when it's taking place. And as we come up to the 80th anniversary of VE Day, the end of the Second World War in Europe, nothing's changed really, is it? Because, wars still have continued. Yeah, maybe not so much of the Great World Wars, if they really were that. Not that they were great, but by means of multiple countries. Now wars are done in a more strategic, proxy wars, isn't it? Usually Russia and the West taking sides, whether it's Vietnam, whether it's Ukraine, or whichever the environment. Yeah, it was just interesting to hear her story of her returning to her family house that was ransacked, and like dirt everywhere, and everything, all the belongings were just like as if they'd been flung about. Just a normal person's house, got nothing to do with. There's no strategic benefit in trashing people's houses, but that's the kind of mentality. It makes me think about like the Rwandan crisis when was it the Houthis, was it? Can't remember, the two tribes in Rwanda. Houthis is Yemen, isn't it? The two tribes in Rwanda, how one would call the other side cockroaches, and they would see them as not even human. And we've seen that in many, we've seen that in the Nazi Party, we've seen that in South Africa and lots of other countries where, and it also obviously in George Orwell's writings, that idea of demonizing the enemy, in the same way the West went, they had Saddam Hussein or they had Osama bin Laden, they need that big brother figure, or what's it in an Animal Farm? Can't remember, is it the sheep that, they have to have this definitive enemy to make it easy for you to hate, to make it easy for you to pick the right side, as it were. And just the idea of that this, the millions displaced, the hundreds of thousands who have died for what? As I always say, that this is what war is about. War is about only two things, usually: power and land. That's it. Most wars can be boiled down to those two things. That it's someone, who wants bits of land, whether it's like the Israel-Palestine issue, whether it's, Hitler with wanting to expand, or Vladimir Putin wanting more for Russia to bring back the USSR, or whether it's power. Usually they go hand in hand, isn't it? The power that I want to be, an emperor. I want to be the one in control of everyone. Because usually they have ideologies that they want to spread, and they feel that it's their God-given duty to bring it to everyone. And it's amazing how effective they are, these kinds of people, these Hitlers, these, whoever, that are able to galvanize millions to their ideology and to do basically their bidding for them. Because it isn't usually, like Hitler or Putin or, whoever that are charging in front, fighting away. They're sitting behind with other people, planning and giving the ordinary people who never had these ideas, but that power that they have to be able to get people to do the most despicable, evil things. I mean, even like from a Western point of view, from the Allies' point of view, to getting someone to pick up a gun and giving them the knowledge that ending another person's life somehow has merit to it. The valor in war, as if there is any such thing, and there isn't. And that's the most despicable thing, that how one man can get another man to go and kill for him, or woman, and have no conscience about that. I mean, a lot of them did suffer from PTSD when it comes to Iraq, Afghanistan. I'm sure during the Second World War, when they didn't have a name for that, or Vietnam, when you hear the stories of the people came back and how it affected their lives, because when you kill people, it must have an effect, unless you're some kind of psychopath or serial killer, that somehow you can enjoy the knowledge that you dropped a bomb that killed families, children, women, or even if you killed, your enemy, who was, say, a soldier, who, was a 30-year-old man or something. There is no valor or merit or anything great about war or killing of each other. And it is the epitome of the breakdown of humanity when we go to these things. But unfortunately, we're led to believe in our system that wars are a necessity. I mean, maybe because of the failure of the system, it's inevitable, because you're always going to get someone who's going to want to control other people, who's going to want to take bits of land, as if you can take it with you when you die, rather than, when someone tries to do something good, like there doesn't seem to be such a thing. I mean, maybe we could talk about Jesus or Nelson Mandela or Mahatma Gandhi or Mother Teresa or whatever, or whoever. It's very difficult to get that. You can get millions of people to go and fight a war for you, to die for you, to wave flags for you, to cheer for you, to come out and clap you, to, support you, fund you. But when it comes to doing the good for humanity, it seems to be a lot more difficult. How weird that is, how sad that is. But yeah, this is the Sudan story, which is the first one. And then the second one is about Donald Trump's first 100 days and talking about DE&I. And it just struck me the very much like the writings of George Orwell in 1984, with Winston revising the newspapers, and you think how far-fetched that is. And yet we see that in a little way, in the sense that how history is being rewritten of the reason for DEI and alike was because in the past, when it came, and still to this day, despite having these things, it still happens, where the majority of major businesses, because the way the system has worked and which countries were the advance and etc., and the way it was organised and who organised it, meant that majority of businesses are run by white men, white heterosexual men. And therefore, in history and still to this day, there are certain managers or HR that will pick white heterosexual people. Why do they always ask you the questions about, what your orientation is or what sex you are and what your age is. It's to give them that chance to do that, really. It's just ask your name, isn't it? But I suppose that's because they have to do it to make sure that they, because of the DI, of having a certain amount of difference because of the abuse of the past. That's the problem. That's why it was come in, because there wasn't the equality, because people would employ white heterosexual men, and if you're a woman, you might not get the job. If you're a person of colour, you might not get the job. If you were homosexual, you might not get the job. Lots of, your name. Even that happens to today, where on Sky News, I believe it was them, that they put in CVs, and this is during the DEI process. They put in CVs, the same CV with the same qualification, but they just changed the surname. A name which sounded more English and a non-English, and they would get results more on the English-sounding name. So it still happens, whether that's unconscious bias or flat-out bias, or even racism or sexism or ageism. The thing is left to our own devices. Unfortunately, we don't do the right thing. So it's like they're sort of making out that, this shouldn't, they're trying to flip the card on the other way around by saying we've been racist by not employing we're applying based on the colour of someone's skin or their sexual orientation rather than merit. But I doubt it's anything like that. And I bet they didn't speak to any HR recruitment people to get any kind of evidence to back up that spurious claim. Because even though the HR department will have, and I don't know if this is the case in the UK, and I don't even know how this all works. So they may even be putting out a false narrative anyway, but I'm assuming from what they said that HR will have a guide to that they need to have a certain amount of ethnicity or sexual orientation within whatever organisation it is, to be able to get funding or to be able to run as a company. I mean, I don't know if that's even the case, but let's say that is the case. I don't think that when these HR people are going, that they're going to say, okay, we've got this CV, and yes, we've hired 5 white people who are really good merit. Yeah. And then it's like, now we have to employ someone who has a disability, maybe autistic or ADHD, or I don't know, a physical disability, whichever it might be, or we have to employ someone who is, of a non-white, or whatever the criteria might be. I don't think they're going to say, okay, so we've got these CVs. I'll just pick this one. That's the way they're making it sound, or that and it's racist in their inference that by suggesting that by them being part of DEI, either whether to do with the colour of their skin or their orientation or their disability, that somehow they would be lacking of merit just because of those things. They've tried to equate that two together, and that's why I wanted to bring this, because that's what I felt was abhorrent about what he was saying in a sort of, without him sort of, dressing up, as it were. I hope you know what I'm implying, and speaking. Because I'm almost certain that when the HR are there, they probably have 10 CVs. They're all as good as each other. They're the same level of merit. And like the idea that by just being non-DEI, which of course majority would be white men, because they talk about sex, so that means women in that sense, because the equality was because men were the only ones that would get employed, especially like with board managers and things like that, because there's other men that employ them. But it's the idea that they're saying that, because they're, white men or heterosexual white men, that they're somehow meritable. Do you know what I mean? I mean, like, I've worked with many people, and you can get, people of all the different kinds, and you'll get, a spread of whether they're good or not good. It doesn't matter to do with any of those things. And I know that's what they were sort of trying to say. And I would love that we'd live in a world, we should live in a world where it doesn't matter, where someone can be trusted to get a CV and pick the person who's best at the job, which could be, loads of people. The scale of who's meritorious is like, I mean, how would you even judge that? You may employ 10 people, but how can you tell which one? You may, this person may have a CV may not be as good, but might actually be better at the job. So it's not like, that's the case. Some people learn differently as well. But it's just, I wish we lived in a world where we could trust that a person could be given a CV and not make an unconscious biased or racist judgment and pick people irrespective of those things, that they would give people. But that's the truth, though. The truth is, we still, even with DI, don't live in a society or a humanity where people don't make those judgments. They do make those judgments. There are some people that make those judgments because we see all these sexual allegations, historical and current, where men still treat women in a certain way, that they won't progress them, that they're asked them to make the tea, or they're asked them to do all these sorts of things, that they don't treat them as equals. We're all equal. We're meant to be born equal, but unfortunately that goes the minute our diapers are put on because of society and our system, not because of intrinsic truth, because intrinsically we are all equal, irrespective of the suits and the titles and all that kind of rubbish. That's all man-made stuff. But the fact is, if you get a CV in front of you and you know that, or you're interviewing someone and you see they slur because maybe they have Tourette's, or they can't answer quickly because they're autistic, or they have some kind of physical disability, and you think, oh, well, they can't be a bank manager or something. Unfortunately, those people still exist, that they will turn down someone because they have a disability, because they're a woman, because of the colour of their skin. If you sort all those things out, unconscious bias and racism, yeah, you can get rid of DEI and all this stuff. So what is Trump's America going to look like now? It's going to go back to the way it was before. And I heard like the overtones of all this stuff, and now it's to do with the trans issues and to do with education, and how that you must love America and be patriotic. America's always been very high on that. But it's that force nature, that McCarthyism that seems to seep through in that punishment if you don't. Why should you have to love something if what they do is not lovable? I can't say I'm a fan of any country, because all countries, all leaders seem to do the not things for the benefit of their citizens that have put them in charge, that don't do things for the benefit of mankind, which would be to get rid of money, to get rid of borders, and to work together as humanity. None of them do that. So why should I show them any respect? Yeah, I show them respect and I follow the law of the land. But do I think that they do the best job for us or for humanity? God, no, they don't. How much of the money do we spend on war, of the profit of killing each other? How much money goes into medicine? How much goes into backhanders? Bridges that get billions and never get built. Or world leaders that lie to their public, like Tony Blair and George W. Bush in the weapons of mass destruction that were never found. The 45 minutes lie. All of this stuff. The nefarious things that goes on that we never know about. Well, I suppose you can't judge anyone if you don't know about them, is it? But what I mean is, there might be, or history, the history of a nation, of what they did to the people of the past and how they profited and still profited by the system that they set up and by the things that they did in the past. The stealing of countries, the killing of indigenous people. What is there to love about any of those things? So yeah, we should love humanity. We should love what we're capable of. But unfortunately, to love a country whose history is... most countries have very questionable histories. Most countries have very questionable world leaders that profit themselves and their colleagues by, you see when they leave office, who they give their peerages and etc. to, who they pardon. We don't see an equality of money, of wealth, of experience, of equality of life. Because we only have one chance at this. This is our one experience. We found ourselves in this place where we had everything and we put price tags on it and possessed it from each other. And none of the world leaders want to change that because they want to hold on to that. They want to be liked. They want to be in power and they want to control us. God, if I lived in America, they'd put me in prison for saying all these things, for having freedom of choice, freedom of expression. Despite being a law-abiding citizen or despite, doing the best that I can. Because the thing is, what I want is the best for humanity. And waving a flag and being patriotic just for the cause of it, blind faith, as it were, it doesn't help no one, because it means you don't actually change what's wrong. If you're only going to, but that's how we are, because everyone believes in their country, everyone believes in their culture, because that's the way we've been brought up. Because the intrinsic truth, the first fact of when you're born, is we're all one. But the next thing you learn is, oh, actually we're not, because we cut everything up and we've possessed everything and we want to compete with each other and have poverty and wealth next to each other where we've got no reason for that other than the system that we live in that creates it. Because we have everything we need. Nothing needs to have a price tag on it because we have every resource, we have all the mental capacity to make everything as brilliant as possible. But we don't choose to do that. Anyway, waffled on long enough. Here's the 2 clips. Take care, take it easy, God bless and peace.
To believe that it's been 2 years since violence flared in Sudan and thousands of people scrambled to leave the country. The war is being fought between the army, led by a senior general, and the paramilitary group, the Rapid Support Forces Command, by the general's former deputy. Once allies, they are now rivals, and that rivalry has had a devastating effect. While difficult to estimate, the United Nations believes that more than 150,000 people have been killed in the conflict, and an estimated 12 million people left displaced. It's believed to be the worst humanitarian crisis in the world. Our Africa correspondent Yusra El Begir returned to her family home in Sudan's capital, Khartoum, and sent us this report.
2 years of war and waiting to return to the city where I was born and the home I grew up in.
This is the first time we're going into Khartoum since the war started. And we take this road straight from the bridge all the way down to where my house is.
2 years of clinging to hope. But war is the enemy of hope. It crushes and gnarls, leaving behind the signs of hell.
I've been waiting for this for 2 years. And it's not a celebration. It doesn't feel like a big homecoming. It feels like this was so unnecessary, so preventable. And now we're just going back to the ruins.
Millions have been displaced by this war, tens of thousands killed and maimed by its violence. The city at the heart of Sudan is now empty. Even the lampposts have been stripped of wires and left to the weeds. My parents fled at the start of the war, convinced it would only last a few weeks. Their overgrown garden tells a much longer story. surrounded by the deserted homes of our displaced neighbors.
Okay, tamam.
We get the all clear to go in. There are no signs of unexploded munitions, but a bomb may have gone off nearby.
It's just so much grief. And at the same time, I know it could have been much worse. They could have been here when these guys came in.
The loss is confirmed. Our home of 25 years, once full of family and friends, and many of our memories, has been ransacked. Now a wasteland of all we cherish.
So this is where the family would sit. We'd wake up every morning and we'd come out and have some tea here.
Our house, like so many others, was occupied by the RSF, who captured Khartoum and claimed the homes in it, leading a mass looting campaign that will take generations to recover from.
They've wiped what looks like feces on the wall and then punctured a hole through this painting of my late grandmother and then just completely trashed my dad's office. And they did it because they could.
And then my bedroom, torn through and stripped of material value, with what I value discarded.
Photo.
That's my university certificate. It's just another piece of rubbish, I guess.
University of St Andrews.
This is one of the albums.
Yeah, it's a good album. Baba Khalid.
I call my mother to put her at ease,
Look at this old one of you as well.
but the grief erupts.
I never thought that I'll see my house like that. I mean, this is my house for the end of my life. I was supposed to die here in this house. I was supposed to be buried here in my country. I was supposed to enjoy my garden and my place. I was supposed to cook and cater for you and your children. I was supposed to be here for the rest of my life. Alhamdulillah, thank God for everything.
Now that the initial shock has subsided, I do feel a sense of closure. I feel a sense of acceptance. It was never going to be pretty. War isn't pretty. But there is something salvageable, and that's enough. And there are many people, thousands of people, who won't get to rebuild, who didn't survive this war.
It's hard to see the life once lived here, under the dirt and desecration. But what they left in their hurry to steal is of the highest worth. The love shared in our home and our country. Light that's been dimmed by the darkness of war, but can never be truly put out.
And Yusra joins me now. Yusra, I mean, this has been such an extraordinarily moving journey for you. You've been covering this conflict right from the very beginning for the last 2 years, every twist and turn and devastation. And of course, you and your family have also been at the center of this story. You felt it in the same way as so many other Sudanese people who, frankly, as you said in your piece, haven't been as lucky as you to be able to go back even to the ruins of their homes. I just want to capture that and how that's been for you. I know that you don't want to make this about you, and it's a wider picture about the Sudanese people, but I do want to hear a little bit more about just having that experience.
We've spoken to people over the last 2 years who've shared the most devastating stories, who've lost loved ones, who've had their children burnt alive in front of them. It only felt right to share what my family had been through. It only felt right to share the fact that this war has spared very few, if any, people at all. That is the scale that we're dealing with. We're not just talking about one house here or there or a frontline zone. We're talking about an entire capital city home to millions of people. That is why
people share. That is why the people who have been in the throes of their devastation, of their tragedy, have stopped and taken a moment to tell us what it feels like. This war has gone on ignored. It has been completely relegated to the sidelines of global politics. That is a huge, grave error. The millions of people whose lives will never be restored will remember this. And history will remember this too. And so archiving these moments, talking to people, seeing what it means for people has been not only important, but also a huge learning experience for us as a team. We've seen the worst of humanity and the best of humanity over the last 2 years. And kind of in the devastation of my home, the things that matter came into focus. It wasn't about the physical photos in the devastation in the wreckage. It was about the people that I had shared those moments with. It was about the memories that we made. It was about the rooms that had people laughing and drinking tea and eating. That's what we're holding on to here. That's what matters. And that is also what has gotten people through the community kitchens, the mutual aid, the fundraising campaigns, the fundraising events abroad, the people who have stood by their families here every single day. That is why we have managed to survive despite the world turning away. And that is why the goodwill amongst the people is what will get us through when foreign aid is frozen by Trump, when global mediation efforts, international mediation fails. I think that is the enduring lesson here.
Yeah, Yusra, I can hear the devastation in your voice, because it has been devastating for the Sudanese people and for those who have watched through your reporting what's been going on inside the country. I want to pick up on what you said there about the determination, the perseverance of the Sudanese people, the best of humanity as well. I remember at the beginning of this conflict, when foreign nationals were still in the country and people were being evacuated, that's when the attention was on Sudan. But there were still so many people who, part of the emergency services, for example, doctors at the time we were speaking to, who were refusing to leave the country because they wanted to stay and help. And that is what has been also quite remarkable about this. Despite the devastation, despite the darkness that we've seen in Sudan, there's also been that level of humanity.
Absolutely. I think our community here reflects the Sudan that will never be crushed or killed or destroyed. And it's the community that has grown amidst the cycles of military coups, of conflict. It's the people that have stuck together. I mean, even just driving around neighborhoods in the northeast of the capital and seeing, people who are sat in front of their bullet-ridden homes, but they're sat together. And the people who've brought water out and are sharing it, and so many who've opened their homes. That's the Sudan that I come back to and that I work for, and I know that people around the world who are Sudanese are feeling the same. And that is why it's been so important to keep on this story, to stay on this story, and to show that the war is not over by any means. We've been seeing people who've been hit by drone strikes, who've lost most of their family members. There's still so much urgency here. People are in such a state of jeopardy. And again, without people sticking together and showing that kind of unified front in the face of unspeakable horrors and atrocities, survival is completely out of the question.
Yeah, absolutely. Yusra, thank you, as always, for all of your reporting. And you can watch more of Yusra's reports from Sudan from the last few years on our website.
What are without doubt the greatest 100 days to begin any American presidency in the history of this nation. This week you've heard about the historic actions President Trump has taken to secure our homeland, to secure our sovereignty, to secure our economy and our supply chains and our industrial base. Today you're also going to hear from me about what President Trump has done to secure our values, our culture, and our way of life from the unwavering assault from the radical left and the communists and the Democrat Party. One of the most significant crises that President Trump inherited upon taking office was the wave of racial discrimination, so-called diversity, equity, and inclusion policies that have taken over both public sector and private sector entities all across the United States of America. Perhaps the most dramatic example of this is that our air traffic controllers were being hired and promoted based on race and gender, not their ability to conduct our nation's air traffic. I would estimate that probably 90% of Americans would agree with the statement that airline safety should be based on your ability to keep, airline safety jobs should be based on your ability to keep planes landing and taking off and flying safely, not on what demographic box you check. President Trump has ended across the entire federal government all hiring, recruiting, retention, promotion, and training based on race and sex. This includes in our law enforcement agencies. So, again, when we took office, even in sensitive law enforcement, national security, and intelligence agencies, we were hiring individuals not on their ability to carry a weapon, not on their ability to keep Americans safe, not on their ability to conduct sensitive intelligence operations, but based upon race and sex. And obviously, that is unacceptable. It's going to be merit-based across the whole federal government. But this wasn't just the federal government. This was the private sector, and this was also, of course, our entire university and education system. So President Trump's Department of Justice, working with other departments and agencies, have made clear that this administration is going to fully enforce Title VI, Title VII, and Title IX of our federal civil rights code. Discrimination based on race and sex is prohibited by law, and this administration will vigorously enforce that. And companies, small or large, that violate plain text of federal statutes will face appropriate financial and other penalties. And this administration is not going to let our society devolve into communist, woke, DEI strangulation. We are going to have a system of merit, which is not just a social and cultural issue, it's an economic issue. When you hire, retain, and recruit based on merit, as President Trump has directed, you advance innovation, you advance growth, you advance investment, you advance job creation, you create the best and safest product for all Americans. When a citizen goes to, say, a hospital in a medical emergency, they don't care what race or sex their doctor or their nurse is. They want the best treatment they can get in that emergency. When they're flying a plane or when they are on an aircraft, they want that pilot to be the best pilot, the safest pilot, not caring what that pilot's race or sex is. This applies across the whole government. In particular, looking at our university system, this administration has opened investigations into universities across the country for violating, we talk a lot about Supreme Court rulings, universities across this country are in plain and direct violation of the Supreme Court's ruling that affirmative action, as in racial quotas and set-asides, are illegal. Students must be admitted to universities on a color-blind basis. But we have demonstrated through clear evidence that our university system, including our medical schools, and perhaps particularly our medical schools, are engaging in race-based discrimination, racial set-asides, racial quota schemes, and other efforts to evade the Supreme Court's ruling, and again, the plain text of federal statute. So universities are on notice, and universities are already facing the financial consequences of their noncompliance with federal law. The clearest example that we're all familiar with, of course, being Harvard, which is engaged in repeat, systemic, and sustained violations of federal civil rights law. Another area of civil rights law that we talk about a lot, of course, is Title IX, sex-based discrimination. And this administration ended the Biden administration's policy and the Democrat Party's policy of allowing men into women's sports, men into women's spaces. We are using every single legal and financial tool we have at President Trump's direction to make it clear that schools and universities are and will lose federal funds, as you've seen in Maine, if you allow men to invade women's sports and women's spaces. And this applies to our whole K-12 system. The Department of Justice is also coordinating with state and local law enforcement to fight child
I'm just going
abuse.
to step
in
away
our
from
school
Stephen Miller, from a
system.
Deputy Chief of Staff, to a Donald J. Trump, as he continues with his diatribe about Trump's plans, this administration's plans to tear up diversity, equity and inclusion policies in the United States. Let's bring in our US correspondent, James Matthews, who's listening into this. And James, as Stephen Miller continues to make the argument for tearing up those DEI programs that were put in place, it strikes that it's one-sided view of history. The reason there was affirmative action programs put in place in the United States, the reason there were DEI programs put in place in the United States were to make sure that workforces were equal and had people from all walks of society represented within organizations.
Yeah, indeed. That's exactly why they were in place, Kamali. You heard it from Stephen Miller there, never a man short of a word or two to reinforce the Trump doctrine. In his view, it's communist woke strangulation. He was, delving hard into that whole DEI situation, which is front and center of the Trump philosophy, and very much speaking to the Trump base there. It's interesting. We're watching him now, and there are many to the left of centre in this country who actually don't watch him, who see him come on and switch him off. But because of the way this country is polarised in terms of how they digest media and digest their politics, it is polarised. And the likes of Stephen Miller, he speaks to the right, it resonates with the right, and that's actually where his core audience is. So in terms of people to the right of centre, that philosophy, it chimes with them, and to that extent, that's why he's at that podium, and he's on cable news, certain cable news channels right now across the United States. But the whole DEI thing, as you say, that's designed, diversity, equity, and inclusion to afford fairness and to inject a sense of balance into employment hiring practices.
We've seen horrifying example after example of young girls being sexually assaulted because school districts have allowed men into women's and girls' private spaces. This administration, President Trump, is at the forefront of protecting women and protecting girls. And nowhere is that clearer than when we are talking about fighting radical gender ideology. This administration is also fighting to get critical race theory out of our school districts. Children will be taught to love America. Children will be taught to be patriots. Children will be taught civic values for schools that want federal taxpayer funding. So as we close the Department of Education and we provide funding to states, we are going to make sure that these funds are not being used to promote communist ideology. For any nation to be successful, it cannot teach its children to hate themselves and to hate their country. So these are a few of the areas in which President Trump has fought the cancerous communist woke culture that was destroying this country, where we were led to believe that men were women, that women were men, that racial discrimination was good, that merit was bad, and that safety and physical security mattered less than the feelings of liberal ideologues. The president has also fought to return the Department of Justice to its core mission of protecting public safety and locking up violent criminals, instead of using the Department of Justice to target conservatives, to target Christians, to target people of faith. The last administration cruelly and shamefully used the power of the Justice Department to go after law-abiding Americans, in particular Trump supporters, conservatives, and Christians. That persecution has ended. The Department of Justice and the FBI are back in the business of going after bad guys, of going after gangs, of going after criminals, and keeping Americans safe. Let me just conclude before taking questions by noting that when you look at the sweep of the first 100 days, every single crisis that has afflicted America for years, sometimes decades, sometimes generations, this president has fought head on. He has taken on every entrenched power structure and system all across this government, this swamp, this town. That includes, of course, the DOGE efforts to slash corrupt, wasteful government spending, graft, and corruption, and to stop billions of taxpayer dollars from going to radical left NGOs. These are left-wing nonprofits. that are used to advance illegal immigration, to advance open borders, to advance gender ideology, and to advance all of this insanity that has been turning our country in the wrong direction for so many years. President Trump took head on the trade crisis afflicting this country with the destruction of our manufacturing and industrial base, the shameful betrayal of the American worker by Joe Biden and the globalists that sent all of our supply chains overseas. He took head on the catastrophe of mass, unlimited illegal immigration that was turning us into a failed third world state, and achieved the lowest level of illegal immigration in recorded history without even a close second. He took on the economic crisis afflicting this country by reopening American energy, by defeating inflation, by lowering gas prices, by ending the onslaught and reversing the onslaught of federal regulation, by reopening coal, shale, oil, natural gas, and fighting now for the largest tax cut and reform, and the largest deregulation reform, and the largest energy reform in American history. These are just some of the things that have ushered in the new golden age, along with his fight to restore the peace that we had for 4 years under the previous administration before Joe Biden sunk this planet into bloodshed and war in the Middle East, in Europe, and rising tensions in Asia. President Trump, in every area of conflict around the globe, has been fighting to restore peace, security, stability, harmony. So he inherited an economic catastrophe, a border catastrophe, a public safety catastrophe, and a cultural catastrophe. And in every case, he has reversed those catastrophes and brought America into the new golden age. So I thank you for your time, and I look forward to
the Deputy Chief of Staff to Donald Trump, Stephen Miller, continuing his assaults on how bad America was before and how much better it is now, he claims. Let's listen into some of the questions that Mr. Miller is going to